Hey guys, welcome to the Health Babes podcast. I am your host, Dr. Becky Campbell with Dr. Crystal Hohn. And today's episode, we talk about the 5 signs your thyroid is not working right. We talk about testing you should ask your doctor for if you suspect you have a thyroid issue, the optimal lab ranges for thyroid health, the driving factors of thyroid disease. We talked a little bit about family life and we answered some listeners' questions. So let's get started. So 20 million people in the United States suffer from thyroid disease, and 60% of them are unaware of it. And it's usually because they don't really know what the symptoms are or what to look for. So can you imagine if they did know, and if their doctors were checking a thorough thyroid panel, which we're going to go into detail what that is, what that number would be, 20 million, it would probably be, what do you think? 40 million?
More. Yeah, exactly. We're just not checking it, and so much is missed, don't you think? And we see this in practice so much.
Yeah, because most people come to us and they've had limited testing. They've had a TSH and maybe a T4 free, which doesn't make any sense because we really know that T3 free is the most usable form of thyroid hormone, which we're going to explain, all the different markers of what you need to ask your doctor for and what they mean. And then you're going to realize how insane that is, that this is the limited testing that we're doing. And if we could only get people to test a full thyroid panel on everybody, I guarantee you so much more of this would not be missed. And people would know ahead of time. This is why we always check for antibodies to the thyroid, so our body can attack the thyroid gland. And that's the most common form of thyroid disease. It's where it all starts for most people. So that's why in our practice, we check such a thorough thyroid panel and we look at the antibodies to the thyroid, because if you can catch that early before there's any destruction to the thyroid gland, you may not start to deplete those thyroid hormones.
And Beck, how many people come to us that have never had their antibodies checked?
90%.
Yeah, no.
90%. And their doctor doesn't even listen to them. No. When they want it checked, people always ask us why, right?
I know.
And I think honestly, if you're going to a general practitioner, maybe they don't know the thyroid that well, right? So then they want to send you to an endocrinologist just to have a more thorough thyroid panel. And I think it's because they don't really know what to do. Okay, so let's say you do have antibodies. What do we do, right?
Exactly.
Right. So we want to kind of, go over all that with you guys today and teach you what does it mean? What should you do if you have the antibodies high with or without the thyroid hormones, showing up yet that they're off.
Right.
And then, there's a really interesting fact. People always ask us, women or men, who has more thyroid disease?
Yeah. And actually 5 to 8%, like women deal with it 5 to 8 times more likely than men because of all of our hormone fluctuations, pregnancy, the products that we use on our skin, like hormone endocrine disruptors. So many things us women go through where we have a lot more fluctuations with our hormones. So we're more likely to deal with it. And then with estrogen dominance too, men can deal with estrogen dominance too. I want to leave them out, but this can block the uptake of thyroid hormone. So we see a lot of estrogen dominance in the practice with women. So
with those products, they create a chemical estrogen.
The xenoestrogens.
Yeah. So you want to explain that, like what a xenoestrogen is a little bit more?
It's basically like a fake estrogen is what I would like to say it is. It's like in plastics, a lot of the products we use, phthalates, parabens, and it can really cause us to go down really unfavorable pathways in our estrogen metabolism, which can lead to, cancer. It can lead to a lot of different things. So it's dangerous. And you just want to make sure you're limiting these things as much as you can in the products that you use. And it can affect so many things, right?
Yeah. And people, probably see a lot of us, in this functional medicine world talking about, using safer products. And I don't know that people even know what we're saying. So, using makeup and
Lotions and
lotions,
yeah.
perfumes, all that stuff that has chemicals in it can actually raise our estrogen levels, or it creates this xenoestrogen, like Crystal was just saying. And that really messes with our own hormone levels because they bind to our estrogen receptors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is why you're seeing a big movement towards clean makeup, clean cleaning products, plastic water bottles. It's so funny because I had these, I just moved. So I had these guys here putting in some flooring for me, and I'm so annoying. So the guy was like, "Can I use your microwave?" Which we don't even use, really. So I said yes, and he had a glass container, and I was so excited to see the glass container, but he had a plastic lid, and he put the plastic lid on top of it to microwave it. And I was like, wait, I'm like, no. I literally I practically dove across the kitchen. I'm like, wait, and he's like, what? And I said, don't put the lid on. And he goes, why? And I said, your plastic is leaching chemicals.
Yeah.
And
really
he just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I kind of gave him a little like small annoying version of the lesson. And he was like, wow, I did not know that. I had no idea. I said, yes. I said, put a paper towel or whatever over it if you don't want it to, go everywhere, but don't put that plastic lid on. You're doing so well with the glass because glass does not leach chemicals the way the plastic does.
Yeah.
But people just don't know. And they, they don't understand.
Even with like Starbucks cups, right? The plastic lids, it's gross. You have to be careful, and it's just not known. We don't know a lot about this stuff. And, it's the world is just about convenience. So you have to really make these small steps to see some big changes with your hormone health. So we could talk about this all day, can't we?
Yeah, it's true. And people think we're being judgmental or just being whatever when we say like, please don't wear perfume around me or whatever. But it's really just trying to protect what we know or what it does to your hormones. So and there's a lot of really cool apps and stuff out there now. Like I love that Think Dirty app, and you can check all of your, makeup and your household cleaners and all that stuff. And it gives you a rating, and it tells you the rating and why it gave it that rating. And it goes through all the chemicals to talk about, what's toxic or what is it doing specifically to your body. So if you guys are trying to figure out how to find this out, look at like the EWG website or which is the Environmental Working Group, and they have an app, and then the Think Dirty app. We like those.
And I always say to people, if you run out of something, replace it with something better. Don't feel like you have to go through your entire house and throw everything out, because that's just not everybody
not feasible for most people.
No.
And just do one thing at a time, the best you can do. And the small things add up over time for sure.
It does. It does. So why don't we go into what the thyroid gland is, Beck?
Yeah. So the thyroid gland is this little butterfly shaped gland right in the front of your throat. Yeah. So hold on, I want to change the view on this. Okay. So anyway, it's the little gland right here in the front of your throat. If you're not watching, it's just, you can feel it. It's little right in front of your throat. You just can touch it, and most people know where it is. So, and it produces thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone, which a lot of people don't realize, is in pretty much every cell in your body. So it's so it's directly or indirectly affecting pretty much every function in the body. So just some examples of that: heart rate, your breathing, your weight, which we know that. I mean, I think everyone at this point probably knows that because it's one of the biggest complaints that we see, and we're going to get into the signs and symptoms soon. But
menstrual cycles, right?
Right. And body temperature, it's like our little metabolism control center of the body. So this is a really good way to understand what the thyroid is doing. So if the thyroid is controlling your metabolism, so there's hyperthyroid, which would indicate too much thyroid hormone. And then there's hypothyroid, which would indicate too little thyroid. or too little thyroid hormone. So when we look at our main thyroid hormones, we have T4, which is our inactive form of thyroid hormone, and we have T3, which is our most usable active form of thyroid hormone. So T4 has to be converted to T3 in the body to be used. So when you're looking at your labs, which we're going to go into exactly what your labs should look like, you're going to see with hypothyroid, typically you have a high thyroid stimulating hormone. So what that means is, and I know so many people get TSH tested, but they don't actually know what it means. So your pituitary gland, it's this little gland that sits inside your brain. And it's kind of like the gland that tells all the other glands what to do with hormone production. So your pituitary gland sends a signal to your thyroid gland, and that's what the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, is. And that tells your body whether you're making too much or too little thyroid hormone. So if your T4 and T3, those thyroid hormones we were talking about, are too low, then your TSH is going to be high because you need a lot of stimulation to, make more of that T4 and T3. So it's kind of confusing, so it's a high TSH, low T3 and T4 is going to be hypothyroid. So too little thyroid hormone. On the other hand, we have hyperthyroid, which is going to be a low TSH because your T4 and your T3 are high. So you don't need to stimulate your thyroid to make more thyroid hormone. So low TSH, high T3, T4. So we're gonna talk about those two today. And then with those, there are autoimmune diseases that go with each. Now, not everybody who has hyper or hypothyroid has the autoimmune disease. But with hypothyroid, the number one cause of hypothyroidism is something called Hashimoto's disease. So Hashimoto's disease is the autoimmune disease where your body is attacking your thyroid hormone, therefore depleting how much thyroid hormone you're making. And it's really more of an immune system issue than it is an actual thyroid issue.
Yeah.
And then with hyperthyroid, it's not as common as hypothyroid, and the autoimmune disease is not as common as Hashimoto's, but you have the autoimmune disease for hyperthyroid would be Graves' disease. So that's when, again, same thing, autoimmune component, but it's making you produce too much thyroid hormone.
It's brutal. Graves is brutal, isn't it? We don't see it as commonly, but it's definitely really hard.
It is. And a lot of these people end up having the, iodine treatment and then they basically, what's happening with that is your doctor is putting you into hypothyroidism and then putting you on medication for hypothyroidism after you've kind of shut down your thyroid. So, and it's sometimes it's necessary. We're not here to say like never do anything that someone tells you as far as that goes, but really we know that the immune system lies in the gut. About 70% of it lies in the gut. So we look at ways that how can we support the immune system first before destroying something so important as the thyroid. So
let's get into some of the signs of
So here's 5 signs that your thyroid isn't working right. So if you think you may have a thyroid issue, but you don't know what to look for here, and there are not just 5, to be clear.
No. We picked 5.
But we picked the top 5 that we see the most. So remember we talked about the thyroid being that like metabolism control system, right? So metabolism is going to be either sped up or it's going to be slowed down. So with hypothyroidism, those low thyroid hormones, everything is slowed down. With hyperthyroidism, everything is sped up. So this is why you're going to see complete opposite things happening depending on what you have going on. So the number one sign that your thyroid isn't working properly would be a change in weight. Now that can be linked to other things, but when we're talking about the thyroid, typically what you see with hypothyroidism is you're going to see a weight gain because you're slowing down that metabolism. So you're not burning as many calories and all that. So you're going to start to put on weight. And not just to keep in mind, you do not have to have all these symptoms or any
Right.
symptoms to have
Right.
this.
Because we see a lot of, patients too with hypothyroidism who don't deal a lot with weight gain. I
Right.
see that a lot, but still, it's just to keep in mind, this is a very common one with.
Yeah, this is probably the one we see the most.
Yeah.
So weight gain for hypothyroidism. And then with hyperthyroidism, you are amped up. So your metabolism is burning, 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 and you're going to tend to have weight loss. Now, have we seen people with weight gain with hyperthyroidism? Absolutely. But it's not that common.
Yeah. And usually, especially with Graves, you see someone with just like an unrelenting appetite. Don't you see that? I know that's happened even with my father-in-law. And he would be happy to share his story. That's why I'm sure. But
and they burn it off though.
Yes, they do.
It.
And it sounds appealing, but it is not.
No.
It is not. When it comes
not, and it comes down to the anxiety that comes along with that, which I'm going to get to in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to changes in digestion.
Yeah. So symptom number 2 or sign number 2 would be changes in digestion. So, constipation. So, there's something called transit time with how fast your food digests and kind of comes out to be poop. And that slows down when you have hypothyroidism. So a lot of people with hypothyroidism are constipated, right? Yeah. Don't we see that a lot?
Oh yeah. Slow motility, really bad constipation. And then the opposite effect with hyper would be a really fast transit time. So a lot of diarrhea, things like that.
Yep. Watery stools, diarrhea. They're going to the bathroom all the time. They're telling us, I can't go, plan to go anywhere because I don't know when I'm going to have diarrhea, which is not fun at all.
No, not at all.
And then I think a universal sign on both ends is hair loss.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's hard too with hair loss because it's such a symptom of so many underlying hormonal imbalances. But for the most part, we do see a lot of hair loss with thyroid dysfunction, and not just on the head. We see a lot of hair loss on the outer 1/3 of the eye, right? With your eyebrows, we see a lot of that. So just keep that in mind if you're struggling with that, to look into the thyroid.
Wouldn't it be nice if we lost the hair like on our chin, armpits, like pubes?
Right.
No laser needed.
Just lose it all there, please, and forget the face and hair where we need it. Oh my gosh, isn't that the truth?
Okay. And so sign number 4 would be energy levels. So think if everything's slowing down, you're going to be more tired, right? You're going to wake up. Our biggest complaint with energy we see with hypothyroidism is feeling like you did not get a full night's sleep. And we have actually a questionnaire that we have everyone fill out when they become a patient of ours. And we see it all the time, right? We get 7 hours plus sleep, feel like, you've had no sleep.
Dragging.
Yes.
Right. So a lot of fatigue with hypo, and then with hyper, you just see a lot of like adrenaline, like just so much energy, but it's almost anxiety energy. It's not
that wired, tired feeling. So they're still a little tired, but they're so anxious and amped up, and just feeling nervous, that nervous energy a lot you see with hyperthyroidism.
And that's why you see too so many headaches, with hyper too, when you're just there's so much adrenaline, you can see a lot of that with it. It's hard, really hard to do.
And when your body is so anxious, think about what that's doing to your muscles and like the tension in your body. It's not good. So
for sure.
I think if I were to compare the two, people with hyperthyroidism probably feel worse, don't you think?
I think so, because it's just so more extreme, and it's just so hard to deal with those symptoms. They're not sleeping at all.
No, they're not sleeping. They're really amped up. Think about drinking 7 cups of coffee, and that's kind of how they feel. So not fun. And then number 5 is temperature. So because, the thyroid plays a huge role in our temperature control. Are you one of those people who always has cold feet, cold hands? Or you're, with your partner at home and you're freezing and in a snow suit practically,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're sweating, so that's a typical sign of hypothyroid. So again, too little thyroid hormone. And then with hyperthyroidism, they're pretty hot,
Yeah.
because everything's so up and they're so amped up, they're sweating a lot of the times. And huge thing is when you're taking, so let's say you're already diagnosed with hypothyroidism.
Yeah.
And you're taking thyroid medication and you start to feel heart racing or palpitations, you start to feel that sweating. Most of the time, that's because you're on too high of a dose of your thyroid medication. So we look for that a lot. And then we'll test our patients and we'll see, oh, well, your thyroid hormones are now going high. You got to reduce this dose. So if they're on hormone.
And they may need to increase it depending on, what their numbers say and the symptoms they're experiencing. So it definitely goes both ways. When you're on medication, especially when you're working with doctors or even functional medicine doctors, you may need to change doses. You need to keep up on that. It's important to always manage and look at your thyroid levels. And Beck, how many times do we hear this too? My doc just wants to check it once a year. I've been on the same dose for how long, right? And they're not keeping up with it too. And I am not downing doctors. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful doctors out there, but there's so many other ways you can take your health into your own hands and get your thyroid levels checked, right? There's a lot of great companies. You can find a doc that's willing to do it. So that's just so important. Don't we see that so much?
Yeah.
In this?
And because thyroid hormone, they fluctuate so much.
Yeah.
And when it comes to antibody levels, they also fluctuate a lot. So you can't chase labs. Well, unfortunately, with thyroid, you cannot chase the labs and adjust all the time, because sometimes you're just dumping a bunch of thyroid hormone and sometimes you're not. And so you have to really work with someone who understands the thyroid so well. And I have Hashimoto's disease, and this is what got me into thyroid. Before, everyone knows me for histamine, but I was a big, we work with so many thyroid patients. My first book is on thyroid disease in general. So, so you have to really work with someone who knows what else is going to be driving your thyroid issue, which we're going to get to in a second, but it's not just about the medication. It's not about chasing numbers, for sure.
No, not at all. Yeah. So let's, so many people are going to, want to know this. So what should we be running in a panel? What should we be asking our doctors for? What's important? Let's list those out. Let's do that.
So one thing I want you guys to know is we're going to put in the show notes. I created this a couple of years ago, but it stands true now. It's called the Ultimate Thyroid Guide. And what it is it tells you all the tests to ask your doctor for, and it breaks down what each marker means, and then also what the optimal range for each marker is. So, but I'm going to still go through that with you now. So
awesome. It's a great PDF, you guys. You can just pull it up whenever you need it. It's very easy to understand because this stuff can get confusing.
Yes. So the number one thing, and everyone's going to test this, is going to be thyroid stimulating hormone. So that's that hormone we talked about that your body's basically signaling your thyroid to make more or less thyroid hormone. And then you're going to do T4, is the hormone that our thyroid primarily makes before it's converted into T3. So we want to see what the total T4 looks like, which is the T4 that's bound to a protein. And proteins are kind of our little carrier mechanisms through the body. And then T4 free, which would be the unbound version of T4 hormone. And then we want to see T3 total. Again, that's going to be the bound version of T3. And then we want to look at the free version of T3, which is the most usable form of thyroid hormone in the body. And then we want to look at reverse T3. So reverse T3 is really important because it tells us, so once your body, so let's say you have T3 total, it's going to go down either the T3 free pathway or the reverse T3 pathway. And it should go down a little bit of both. So when it goes down too much, the of the reverse T3 pathway, that's your body's way of telling you, I'm tired. I
Yes.
need rest. I'm inflamed. I've had enough. So we're looking for levels, and someone asked, we're going to get to listeners' questions in a little bit. Someone asked the optimal ranges. So we'll go through each range for you. But when the reverse T3 is too high, that is a big signal. We test this in everybody and we retest it in everybody. And it's a really good indicator of, are you, do you need more rest? Are you inflamed? And then are you getting better? Right?
Stress is a big driver.
Yeah, stress, huge. Yeah.
We call that the hibernation hormone. It can just kind of sit there. If you're chronically stressed, you're just going to feel awful. It can give you a lot of hypothyroid symptoms, if you have really high reverse T3. So you want to work on that stress. I mean, is stress not the driver of so many things? I mean, we could talk. It's like everybody wants to roll their eyes at it because we all have stress. We're all trying to manage the big guy, right? So it's so important to do that. But I didn't mean to go off on a tangent.
No, that's okay. And I think, with stress, it's really important to understand, we know it's not easy to manage stress. I think people get mad when you say manage stress and then you leave like that. So we don't just do that. We actually give our patients exact instructions on how to manage stress.
Manage it.
Yeah. And everyone's different on what's causing their stress. So we listen to where it's coming from, and then we give them the best instructions we can to manage it. And we're working on it ourselves. I mean,
my gosh,
it's a constant in this world.
Yeah, we all have it. We just have to learn and give our bodies the tools necessary to help manage it and adapt better, because you can't take all stress away. Like if someone has a really stressful job, you need to work. You can't take your job away, but you gotta manage stress. So
there's the good stress, right? The eustress, which they say, so that would be like working out, certain things like that, where you're putting your body into a little bit of stress, but it's ultimately for a goal it's a good thing on your body. And then there's the bad type of stress. So we're trying to get rid of the bad type. Or how your brain sees the bad type, right? The perceived stress.
For sure.
Okay. So then the antibodies are thyroid peroxidase antibodies. That's the main marker that people use to diagnose Hashimoto's disease. So again, that is the autoimmune disease that affects it basically signals your body. So in autoimmune disease, your body kind of targets a certain area. And with Hashimoto's, it's targeting your thyroid gland, and your body's going to start attacking your thyroid gland. And then the more that is happening, you start to deplete those thyroid hormones. So that is the number one cause of hypothyroidism. And I've seen anywhere from 90 to 96% of hypothyroidism is caused by a Hashimoto's disease.
Hashimoto's. Yeah.
Yep. And also, just so you know, this is really important. Not everybody is going to show the antibodies on blood work. I don't, and I have Hashimoto's. The only way I knew I had Hashimoto's was after getting a ultrasound.
Yeah.
So it's looking at the echotexture, which is basically like the hills and valleys, or the smooth texture of your thyroid gland. And so that's how you know in some people. So about 20% of people do not show the antibodies, and they still have hypothyroid or Hashimoto's disease.
And how many times, do patients do a full thyroid panel, but without antibodies and everything looks good, but they may, maybe they didn't have an ultrasound, or maybe they didn't check their antibodies and, the antibodies are high, right?
Yep.
So it hasn't attacked the thyroid yet. So then we know this is more of an immune system issue. So there's so many things we can be doing to support that, to get ahead of it now, right?
Yeah.
And we'll get into that a little bit more of some things we can do, to support thyroid and all that.
And this is why it's so frustrating when people don't have those tested, because we have tested so many people who have high antibodies. So that's the thyroid peroxidase antibodies, and they may have high thyroglobulin antibodies, not always. And they don't have a disruption in their thyroid hormone T4, T3, TSH levels. And so we know, okay, this is coming
Right.
basically, but it hasn't affected the thyroid yet to the point where it's showing up on labs. And let's start doing these A, B, and C to stop that from happening or to slow down the process at least. So, and it can really prevent a lot of people from having to be medicated or, having to get symptomatic or whatever it is. And I just want to say that thyroid medication is not a bad thing.
No.
It's one of the least I don't like the most
Yeah, it
benign,
doesn't
I
give a
guess.
lot of side effects, I don't
No,
feel. No,
it
it's such
doesn't.
a it's so important if you
Yeah,
really, really need it. And there's a
it
time
is.
and there's a place for it.
Yeah.
So I always make sure I stress that to our patients, when it
Yeah.
comes to
Cause people
thyroid
have that guilt
Oh yeah.
complex when it comes to medication. And, it's worse to not have enough thyroid hormone or to have too much than it is to take medication. So, but we always want to try to avoid it if
Exactly.
possible. So we
Yeah,
work with both.
exactly. Yep.
And
And then
then
we have, go ahead.
I was just going to say the last marker that we really look at, and this is only if you have hyperthyroidism and your antibodies are positive, you would then check something called TSI, and that would let you know if you have Graves' disease, which is the autoimmune component of hyperthyroidism, or not.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what we do with our patients.
Mhm.
So we'll kind of walk you through what a functional medicine doctor should be doing, what
Yes,
we do,
yes.
to help people figure out, because there's always a driver. And in my book, I talk about, I think it's the 7. So this is my thyroid book, the 30-day thyroid reset plan. And it's disarming the 7 hidden triggers that are keeping you sick. And there are more than 7, but this was kind of the big ones. So we, first and foremost, we take a very detailed history.
Oh yeah.
We want to know what you're eating. We want to know how you're sleeping, all that stuff, right?
Mhm.
And just any history you've had, like how was your birth? How was, were you on antibiotics when you were younger? Like, was your mom on antibiotics when you were uh, in her belly? So all of this stuff really matters. So
Are
we
you on
go
birth
through that.
control? What
Yeah.
medication are you taking?
Yes.
Those things.
Yes, exactly. So the first thing that we do with everyone is look at diet, because
Mhm.
diet plays a huge, huge role. And there's actually a study that, and there's plenty of studies. I'm only telling you one. But there is a study called The Importance of Nutritional Factors in Dietary Management of Hashimoto's Thyroiditis.
Mhm.
So if you're going to a doctor at this point that is telling you that diet does not matter when it comes to thyroid disease, I would strongly recommend you go to a different one, because
Absolutely.
they're not paying attention to even the literature at this point, because when there wasn't any studies on this, that might have been an excuse, but now there are, and there are plenty. So this specific study talks about, how there's a big genetic component to thyroid disease, which we know, especially with the autoimmune parts of thyroid disease. But in this specific study, they talked about, and I loved this because this
Mhm.
is not even talked about much. So they specified that stress, toxins, the basically health of your gut. So microbiota, which is
Right.
basically our little gut community. So looking at dysbiosis, so meaning we have too much bad bacteria compared to good bacteria, or maybe we have a yeast overgrowth, or maybe we have parasites, whatever's going on in there plays a big role in this. And remember, we talked about how 70% of your immune system lies in your gut. So this is a really, really big factor in what's going on with your thyroid, or any autoimmune disease for that matter.
Yeah.
So, and then under or over nutrition, which a lot of people we work with, they come to us either under eating, because they're told they have to eat 1,200
Right.
calories a day because they're gaining weight and they want to lose it. And they're really damaging their hormones, like all of
Yeah.
them,
Not just thyroid. Exactly. We see under eating so much, and your thyroid gets impacted by that. You have to be so, so careful of that.
Yeah.
Overeating, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yes. Or eating the wrong foods. Right.
Right.
So, and so then they also acknowledge in the study how casein from dairy and then gluten can be an issue
Yes.
for thyroid disease. Yeah.
Oh, I
So,
agree.
so I like to explain, some people, I think, not all, but some get upset about the gluten, don't eat gluten kind of movement. And there
Yes.
is an actual scientific explanation behind this, especially when it comes to thyroid disease. So gluten's molecular makeup is very similar to the thyroid cells, the molecular makeup of the thyroid. So when you have thyroid disease and when you eat gluten, your body sees that they're both very similar. And what happens is it starts to attack you at the thyroid gland even more when you're consuming gluten, because it's called molecular mimicry. So your thyroid gland's basically mimicking, or they're mimicking, the makeup of each other. And so your body thinks it's attacking a foreign invader, which would be the gluten, and it starts attacking the thyroid. And this can also happen with dairy, with the casein in the dairy. So this is why, if you're going to do anything for your thyroid, the number one thing I would say would be remove gluten, and at least for some people, dairy, not everybody, right? We're much more concerned about the gluten. So yeah, so they acknowledge that in the study, and there's other studies that acknowledge this. So the next time your doctor wants to tell you
There's
that
no
this is not
studies.
right, that this is not a real thing, you might want to go on to, there's a website called PubMed, and that's where you can find peer-reviewed research. So basically it's that they did these, they tested things out with different people and they got an outcome, and they explained the whole thing to you. So you might want to print out some of those and bring them to your doctor and let them know that
They're pretty easy to understand and get through too. If you
Yeah.
really are a research person, it's a great avenue to go.
And if you're not, just read the conclusion. I mean, it's.
And if you can't read that real well, just race on down.
But also be careful at who is doing the research, if they have an agenda, you know what I mean? So like, let's say it's that big thing that we know about happened years ago with the sugar industry. They were funding all these, research papers saying how fat was bad for you. And it was because the sugar industries were funding them. They're paying scientists to basically lie. And so you have to just be careful. So those are things to look at when you're looking at peer-reviewed research. Make sure that the person doing the study does not have anything to gain. So do you want to walk us through, like, what do we do with each patient besides diet?
For sure. So first and foremost, especially with thyroid or any hormone, oh my gosh, with anything really, you want to support your amazing detox pathways, right? Especially the liver. So what we do with patients is, and if you think about it, our amazing pathways, they're constantly working for us, right? Like our skin, we need to make sure we're going to the bathroom, urinating regularly, so drinking lots of water, our kidneys, our liver, all these areas are constantly working for us, but they get over.
What are they? Why don't you say, like, go a little deeper? What are they doing? What does detox mean?
Yeah. So all of these things that we're exposed to, like chemicals, environmental toxins, the stress that they're under, we need to be able to be eliminating a lot of these things, right? So, and we excrete them through these processes. So we really want to support the liver. So we're always starting with supporting the liver with patients, especially with thyroid, because a lot of that T4 to T3 conversion happens in the liver, right? So we always do a lot of, like gentle castor oil packs with patients, get on really good liver support. There's so many different types of liver support, but we absolutely love working with medicinal mushrooms, NAC, things like that. Like we love our liver love.
Yeah,
right?
we have a product called Liver Love, and it has N-acetylcysteine, milk thistle, and medicinal mushrooms in it, which are not only supporting your detox pathways, but they're supporting your immune system with those mushrooms.
Right. There's so much, but just sticking with, supporting the liver with thyroid, it's so important to start this process, especially too, before we start working on the gut, right? It's because we do a lot of gut testing with our patients. So when I say gut testing, doing like a GI map testing, or even checking for SIBO with a lot of patients. So doing
Which
like
is what?
a SIBO breath test.
What is SIBO?
SIBO is small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So we'll be checking that with a lot of patients, or doing a GI map test, looking for H. pylori bacteria, opportunistic bacteria, parasites, candida. All of these things can really also hinder that T4 to T3 conversion, right?
Right.
And the gut. So we want to make sure we're looking at that. And with gut health, with everything, I mean, you want to be metabolizing your hormones efficiently. This isn't just to do with thyroid health. This is, gut health is responsible for so much of our, our hormone metabolism. So we're not only working on thyroid, we're working on so many other things when it comes to, working on the gut. And then don't forget, we need to be absorbing a lot of the nutrients from our foods, right? And so a lot of the times patients aren't absorbing well. So when you're working on your gut, you're also working on, absorption. And then, of course, we do a lot of hormone testing. So we work a lot with the Dutch test, which looks at the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and the thyroid sits on that same axis. So you want to make sure you're looking at your estrogen and your testosterone and your progesterone and your DHEA and your cortisol. So it's also not just looking at, these markers and blood work. It's not just a snapshot. It's looking at how you're metabolizing them. So it's giving you a really good picture at what your body is doing. Yeah. And then we do a lot of blood work, right? You want to get into blood work? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we look at lipid panels. So that's cholesterol, triglycerides. And what we're really seeing with that is, how that the cholesterol can tell you a lot about how the thyroid's working. So a lot of people with thyroid issues will have a high total cholesterol and a high low density lipids profile. And so and so you'll know it's not really your cholesterol, it's really has to do with your thyroid. So if that's kind of the picture that you're seeing.
Right.
And then with triglycerides, which is part of the lipid panel, we're able to connect that to heart health and also insulin resistance, so blood sugar regulation, which is really important. And then we look to see how well your body's methylating, and that methylation is a very complicated process, but the short version of it is how well, one of the main things is how well do you detox. So how well do you push the toxins out is what we're saying. And that's when she was referring to the pathways. She's talking about, we use pathways to push toxins in our body, out of our body. We use pathways to push excess hormone out of our body. So we look at a marker called homocysteine, and that tells us, do you methylate well or not, and then we look at, to see what is the liver doing? What are the kidneys doing? And one thing to know is when you're looking at liver function, most people have a little bit of a sluggish liver, liver function, if they're living in this world, because we're exposed
being overburdened, you have to work at that.
Yeah, we're exposed to so many chemicals and environmental toxins and everything and everything has to be put through the liver. So you do not have to have high liver enzymes to have an issue with your liver. If your liver enzymes are high, that is like a really big warning sign. So we like to look at that. We like to see what your red blood cells look like, your white blood cells. Do you have infections that can kind of lead us to that? And yeah, are you anemic? Exactly. Like, in other words, are you iron deficiency anemia, B vitamin deficiency anemia, and then full thyroid panel. So we look at a lot of stuff, and we don't do the hormones on blood typically. We may do some hormones on blood that are not included in the Dutch test, which we love the Dutch test. And they're looking at our sex hormones, which are primarily produced by our ovaries, but also our adrenal glands do help make those sex hormones. And then hormones like DHEA and cortisol is your stress hormone. Those are adrenal hormones. So we're looking at pretty much, a lot, as much as you can really upfront. And then if people need more, which they don't typically, right? We typically run those tests, and that's all it takes. But if they are not getting better within a certain amount of time, then we'll start looking at chronic viruses, heavy metals, mold, stuff like that. So
we see a lot of changes with those tests, especially when it comes to supporting the thyroid, for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And some people can do, glandular thyroid supplements and do really well on them and not have to take thyroid medications. And then some people do. And so either one is fine. So we decide who's a good candidate for what and what support would be best for them. And, we like to work with their original doctor if they have a diagnosis already.
Right.
So that we're all on the same page.
Exactly. It's important to have a team, when you're working on this, for sure. Let's talk about some of the nutrients to help support the thyroid.
Yeah. So I'm sure most people know probably selenium. When you hear selenium, I think you at this point, maybe if you know anything about thyroid health, you would relate it to the thyroid. So it's really important for that conversion of the T4 to T3. And we've seen, some issues where people don't actually have necessarily hypothyroid disease or hypothyroidism, but they just have a conversion issue. Yeah. So like their T3 may be low because they're not converting enough T4 to T3. So that's when, that conversion happens in the liver, it happens in the gut and some other areas of the body. So that's why we're looking at all that stuff. But selenium is really good at helping convert T4 to T3.
And you want to make sure you're getting in selenium too. If you're getting an iodine, that's important.
Yes. So there's studies, and when I wrote my book, there was a study that I found. I think there's more now, but that showed how selenium really impacts the inflammatory activity of autoimmune disease. So basically, if you take selenium, it can really reduce the inflammation, which can actually help reduce the damage to the thyroid in some cases. So it's really important to take it. And so that leads to the second nutrient, which is iodine. And you have to be careful with iodine. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword. So so it's extremely important for thyroid hormone synthesis. But it needs to be taken with selenium. And you don't want to just take a bunch of iodine for most people, because like I said, about 90 to 96% of people have the inflammatory autoimmune Hashimoto's disease. And sometimes iodine can actually make your thyroid more inflamed.
It can. So, especially with patients who've come to us who are taking loads of iodine.
Yes.
Their body does not need loads of iodine. Let me stress that.
And no selenium with it to kind of counteract.
And Beck, tell about that patient with the goiter. Right?
Yeah. So we had a patient who came to us, and she was on high dose. It's a supplement called iodoral, and she was on that supplement, and which I'm not saying it's a bad supplement, but for her it was. And her doctor put her on that for her thyroid, and I could see her neck was like this, right? And so we did a urine test for iodine, and she was overloaded. I mean, completely overloaded. And so we took her off the iodine, and it got better on its own, luckily, but it's not the case for everybody. So you do have to be careful. So we do have a thyroid supplement that's a blend of all the nutrients you need. It's called Ultimate Thyroid Support. But if you want to do it with food, you can do selenium. You can do 2 Brazil nuts a day, and that is your selenium intake needed. And then you could do a couple of kelp flakes. So kelp is a form of iodine. And the flakes are good because you can really low dose it. So you could do that. And I do talk about that in my book. So
seaweed snacks are good too. They're yummy if you like that kind of
Yeah, I like them. I think they're good. Seaweed is what she said. Yeah, I think they're really good.
The lime flavor's good.
And if some people might think you're completely weird. I
Oh
remember
yeah,
when
for sure.
my ex-husband thought they were disgusting, but I was like, these are great.
So
Um,
another nutrient that's really important, especially for autoimmune, is vitamin D, right? So,
yes.
90% of thyroid disease is autoimmune. So you want to make sure your vitamin D levels are good. And you want to make sure it has K2 in it. And make sure you don't have any issues with clotting, of course, with K2. But yes, vitamin D is so important, not only for our immune system, but for so many hormones. So
Yeah, and K2 helps the vitamin D get absorbed better.
it does.
Sometimes calcium and D can calcify in the soft tissue. So you wanted to do the K2 with it to help it kind of move out of there and get absorbed in the places that it's needed. So again, K2 can be an issue, have a blood clotting disorder. So always ask your doctor about that before just taking it. So some people have to take D without the K2.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about iron too, Beck.
Yeah. So iron, so we have that the thyroid peroxidase is what we're looking for with the antibodies, but it plays a role actually in our thyroid, which is important. And that's why you don't want to have antibodies against it, killing it. So if you don't have enough iron, you can reduce that thyroid peroxidase activity in the body. And so you don't want to ever assume with iron. You would want to run a full iron panel with ferritin, which ferritin is the stored form of iron. I think it's the most important iron marker, don't you? Yeah.
For sure. And I don't feel affect that much. Do you?
No, I mean, and so again, that's why there's a lot of versions of minerals and multivitamins that say without iron, because some people are storing too much iron and you never want to take iron ever without having it checked.
No, ever. Because we see a lot of iron overload in the practice, and this could this can damage the hypothalamus.
Right. And the hypothalamus.
And many other things.
The hypothalamus is that little gland where all hormone production pretty much starts. So we don't want to damage that. So this is why we always test and we never guess when it comes to this kind of stuff, because I think something like selenium is something you don't have to test for. But when it comes to even vitamin D, some people have too much, and some people, with thyroid disease, it can be harder to absorb vitamin D. So you really want to know, and that way you know how much to take, right? Because we see a big vitamin D deficiency, and it's, like Crystal said, it's with autoimmune disease being the biggest cause of thyroid disease. Vitamin D is very good at supporting the immune system.
Yeah. It's so important for so many things, but you just don't want to blindly supplement with some of these big guys like the vitamin D, iron, even copper, right? You've got to be careful with that too, especially when it comes to the thyroid. We see even a lot of copper toxicity in the practice.
Yeah. And we see that with a lot of birth control, hormonal birth control.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It drives that copper up, and there's copper toxicity is a real thing. And it can make people have a lot of emotional, mental disorders, kind of drive that, make it worse. So those are something. That's why, and it's actually, I love Pure Encapsulations makes a good mineral mix, and it's called Mineral 650, but they have the iron and copper free. Because those are two things you should never take without knowing.
Yes. I know. I love that. That's great. Yeah. So let's talk about life a little bit, Beck. What do you think?
Yeah. And then we'll get to some Instagram questions. So we're not done with the thyroid. But yeah, so summer's here. So we have kids. Yeah.
My kids got out of school yesterday, which we're all so pumped about it. But of course, we got to start juggling everything with work. They're going to be home with me when I see patients, but they're so good. So they'll be great. But we're excited. I'm ready for summer. See, I live in Michigan for people who are listening. And so we like these 3 months that we get of beautiful weather. I am just soaking it up. That's what we're going to be doing. A lot of lake time, a lot of tubing, skiing, all the things.
And I live in Florida, which is
Beautiful
completely
Florida.
opposite. Well, we're actually, summer is the worst time of the year as far as weather goes, because it's kind of like when you walk outside, you're walking into a sauna and
It
your
is bad.
sunglasses immediately fog because the humidity is so high. So we kind of treat summer the way that you guys treat winter, where we stay inside more, or we're either in the pool, at the beach, or inside because it's so hot. And for
Yes.
you guys, it's like we're free. We get out of this, cold weather, and we can do so much, which is why I might be coming up to Michigan at some point.
Oh yeah, for sure. You guys, this is a really funny story, but with me not being used to Florida humidity, well, me and Beck we have a new book coming out soon, and I flew out to Florida to do a photo shoot with
Which
her.
was 2 months ago, by the way, when for me, I was like, woo, it's kind of chilly out.
You guys, I was not used to the humidity. Okay. And so we had the photo shoot outside, and I am not kidding when I say that I felt like during the photo shoot, like a wet poodle. Like I kept saying to Becky, I was like, girl, I flew out here. There's no way these pictures are going to be beautiful. No way. No way. I look like a wet poodle. I'm sweating from my pits. Under my boobs are sweat. Like I am just a mess, right? And Becky is dying laughing. She's like used to it, but it was so humid. I don't know how you guys handle that humidity. I mean, I remember Georgia, right?
Yeah, but it's totally, Georgia's hot, but not humid like Florida. And her hair was sticking to her face. And it was the morning. I mean, I'm just looking at her. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I don't, and Crystal's the most upbeat, chipper person, like genuinely just happy person you'll meet. She was distraught. I mean, she was.
I'm like, I'm going to ruin our photos. This is crazy. I cannot stop my sweating. And but they turned out beautiful, didn't they?
They did. And we did cut the photo shoot maybe a little short because we were starting to melt.
So yes, we're both excited so your kids got out last week, right? With school?
They got out last week.
Yeah.
And it's hard because, we are so blessed to work from home.
Oh,
right. And so we're not complaining.
No.
But in all honesty, you still have the mom guilt, even being home, like even having to go in the room for a few hours while they're just doing whatever. You want to be entertaining them, and I have 3 boys.
Yes.
And so you want to be entertaining them, but at the same time, I can't just shut the practice down for 3 months.
No.
So yeah.
I know. I had to kick mine out there playing with the dog. I'm looking at him right out the window right now. It's just to do this podcast. So, but it's worth it. It's worth it. It is great. But yes, I'm excited for summer. It's going to be good. So many good things coming up back too for the podcast, don't we? We have a lot of things planned for it. We're so excited for the new book. It's just so many good things happening. Feel very blessed.
Yeah, we're making a little bit of a change with the podcast. So we've had a lot of feedback that people want to hear from us, and that makes sense. So we're going to be doing a lot more talking ourselves. And we are still going to have guests, just not all the time. So so we love feedback too. So any feedback you guys have, you can definitely tell us. Only as long as it's nice.
If it's mean, no.
If it's mean, DM us.
Oh, that's funny.
All right, well, let's get to some Instagram questions. Yeah. So, I love to put up like the question box, and we always get tons of questions. So the first one we got was from Shannon.
Yeah. What are the best workouts for someone with low T3, T4? So when it comes to working out, again, whenever your body is going through a big stressful event, or like if you're dealing with some major hormonal dysregulations, you want to be careful with the amount of added stress that you're putting on your body, right? So even though working out is a good stress, you want to be careful you're not pushing yourself too hard. This is the same type of concept as you don't want to be under eating, right? Because it puts way too much stress on the body. So when it comes to workouts, I think for someone who's dealing with really low thyroid hormone or any big hormonal imbalance, I'll just say that you want to do, more comforting workouts, right? Like, so lots of walks, Pilates, yoga. You could, definitely break a sweat, but don't do a lot of HIIT training. It's just so much stress on the body. And even add in some really good weight resistance. Again,
Yeah.
don't do a lot of heavy lifting, but weight resistance is excellent for your metabolism, for your blood sugar, for the thyroid. So that is the best I feel, when it comes to that. Do you agree, Beck?
Yeah. And this is why we love the guys at Mind Pump. They have all these online programs
Oh,
for
yeah.
resistance training, and they have different programs depending on what your goals are. So I do really well with their anabolic program, which is basically resistance training, but where you're resting in between sets and you're not doing this like high intensity where you're running on the treadmill and then getting off and doing,
Right.
weighted jumping jacks and push-ups, whatever it is, and you're just kind of overdoing it and you're really exhausting yourself further. So I love that program of theirs. It's called MAPS Anabolic. And that's what I've responded best to. That's what I feel the best after. And I see the most, my body responds the best to it. So, doing weight training with resting in between. So it's really,
Yes.
don't you do well with that too?
Very well. Weight training with resting in between. I like doing even, walking on incline,
Yeah.
if you're dealing with heavy winters and you can't get outside, or if you don't want to go to a gym, if you have a treadmill at home, that's great too.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, you just want to be careful.
And
Not to-
and I think, having a goal of how many steps you want to get in a day and not
Yeah, that's
necessarily
great.
having to do like, cardio, as opposed to just knowing, okay, I need to get 10,000 steps in a day, and whatever, either you're going to go for a couple walks a day or you just are constantly moving and you're going to get it from that. So I
Yeah.
think that is the best
Yeah, for
thing
sure.
to do. Yeah.
And you want to make sure you're moving throughout the day. Just we can mention that, right? All
Mhm.
the sitting that we're doing, there's so much that you take breaks, get up, move around, move your body. You don't have to just think, okay, I have my set workout time. Just make sure you're active throughout the day too. That makes a world of a difference for your
Yep.
metabolism.
100%. Yeah. Sitting is one of the worst things you can
Oh,
do for your spine and your
me and
body.
Beck have standing desks. It's
We
great.
do. But also standing can be an issue if you're just
Yeah.
standing. So you kind of want to move while you're doing that
Yeah.
too. So I just got a new, I don't know what it's called, but
Like a
so
wobble.
you wobble on it, but I don't, it's kind of curved, and it actually puts a lot of pressure on the medial inner side of my knee. So I'm going to have to get a different one. But yeah, so just trying to move around while you're standing. So that's that question. So let's move on to Melody. She asked if there was any connection with thyroid disease and histamine issues and lupus. So let me break those two down. Okay, so lupus is an autoimmune disease. So this really holds true to any autoimmune disease. So once you have one autoimmune disease, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to get another autoimmune disease. So yes, having the autoimmune thyroid disease, which would be either Hashimoto's or Graves', does really tie into things like lupus. So this is again where the gut comes into play. Having the something called leaky gut, which is where the barrier of your gut lining is compromised, and so your food, as you're supposed to be digesting it, is getting onto large particles and causing a really big inflammatory response, which is not supposed to happen. And so then your body can start tagging things as foreign invaders, and that can increase your likelihood of getting autoimmune disease. And if you already have one, it can definitely increase your likelihood of getting another. So again, looking at gut health is important for that. So anyone listening that doesn't know what histamine issues are, it's a whole nother.
We'll
We
do another
actually have,
episode on that.
yeah, we're going to do a third episode on that. We have 2 already. And it's what my last 2 books are, and what we see a lot in the practice is mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance. So in my first
histamine book, I actually did, we are both big graph people. So we love to just look at graphs, right? So I did one for hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism tied to the mast cells and histamine release. So with hypothyroidism, you're going to see an increase in mast cell production. So that means, mast cells, they kind of hold these inflammatory chemicals, and histamine is one of them. So you're going to get an increase in histamine release with that. And then with hyperthyroidism, you get an actual increase in histamine receptors in the body. So meaning the places, these little, I do this because that's kind of what they look like. The places that are chemical messengers like histamine sit, there's more of those. And so this can actually make you more symptomatic throughout the whole body if you have too much histamine coming to the body. So yes, thyroid disease and histamine intolerance can go hand in hand, and estrogen can play a very big role in these, because estrogen is estrogen dominance creates, it signals your body to release more histamine, and then histamine tells your body to release more estrogen, and then more estrogen can be a problem for the thyroid. So yes, they can definitely go hand in hand. We see it all the time. I have mast cell activation syndrome. And with my mast cell activation syndrome, I have histamine intolerance and I have hypothyroidism, which are both in very, very good control. I haven't had to take thyroid medication. I really only had to take it 2 times in my life. And that was when I first got diagnosed and right after one of my kids. But my lifestyle changes have, fortunately, I don't have to do that anymore. And also with the histamine, I tend to do really well and can even eat plenty of high histamine foods at this point. All right, so we have one more question. So Yoga Bliss 300. Sorry, I didn't get the actual name on this one, but that is the Instagram handle. So this question was, what are the optimal thyroid ranges? So one thing I want you guys to understand is that conventional medicine has very wide ranges for the thyroid. So this is why thyroid disease is missed a lot, don't you think?
Oh yeah. I can't tell you how many times patients come to us and tell us, doctors told me my levels were good. And I'm like, you know what, just send me your labs. Just send us your labs. Let's look. And it's way, you know what I mean? It's just way out of range. So their ranges are just so large, so large when it comes to.
It's like what, 4.5 until you even notice that there's an issue with TSH, which we don't see it that way. So we have, and this is highly recognized, even
it is.
With some endocrinologists do recognize this, the conventional medicine or just the lab ranges in general. Let's say you go to LabCorp Quest, they're going to be too wide. So we've tightened those up, and that guide that we told you about really goes into a lot more detail. That's what I'm just going to give you the high points. So TSH, that thyroid stimulating hormone, I like to see that between 1 and 2. A little bit below 1 is fine. Maybe a little bit above 2 is fine. Once we start seeing it at around 3, we start to wonder, what's going on. And then free T4. So you're really more interested in the free versions of these. So I like to see it between 1 and 2. That's pretty good to me. And then free T3, which is the most usable form of thyroid hormone, is between 3 and 4. Anything when you're getting towards 4 and over, you got to be careful. You're probably going to start getting some palpitations and that type of thing. But most people are under that. They're not usually above it. So that's when you start getting tired and all those lovely symptoms of the hypothyroid. And then reverse T3 is, I don't like to see it over 12. Right. 15 is probably the max that I like to see it at, but really I like to see it at 12 or lower.
Yeah.
So, well, that's, we're going to do more on thyroid. We're kind of we're breaking it down into little chunks because it's a lot to absorb. But we wanted to get some main points out to you guys. So this is a really good starting point. If you think that you have thyroid disease, what symptoms to look for, some resources. Obviously, we take patients virtually. We would love to work with you. very minimum, at least get the book and do the dietary changes in there and just kind of learn about it. And then we're going to do some more. So we'll ask for more questions, we'll ask for more questions and we'll make some more episodes on this. And, we thank you guys for listening and being a part of this. And
great. You guys are going to love this episode, I feel.
we did. And so, give us your feedback and we love, if you can take a minute to leave a review. That's super helpful for the listeners to know what episodes you liked. And so they can kind of, know where to go with that. And so thank you guys so much for listening and we hope you have an amazing day.